The dirt was cold against my cheek before I understood what had happened. One moment I was kneeling beside the rose bed, pulling a stubborn weed near the fence post, and the next I was on my side in the grass, my left arm folded beneath me at a strange angle, the sky tilted wrong. I heard a ringing, high and distant, like a phone in another room. My fingers moved but couldn't find anything to grip. The soil smelled like rain, even though it hadn't rained in days. I tried to call out. What came was barely a whisper. I lay there long enough to watch a cloud pass slowly overhead, long enough to notice that the sprinkler near the back gate had been dripping all morning, leaving a dark ring in the dirt I'd been meaning to fix, long enough to understand that no one was coming unless I made them come. My phone was in my cardigan pocket. I had made that a habit after my husband passed. Always carry it, Ruth, you never know. So I reached for it with the arm that still worked, fumbled with the screen, and called my daughter first. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my son next. He answered on the 3rd ring but hung up after 2 seconds. A pocket dial dismissal. I called again. Nothing. I lay there a moment longer, listening to the drip of the sprinkler and the low hum of a lawnmower 2 streets over. Then I called the only other number I could think of. Patricia from the postal route had been delivering my mail for 11 years. We had talked about her grandchildren, about my roses, about the best way to keep squirrels out of a garden. She had my number because I once held a package for her when the delivery van broke down. I did not know if she would pick up. I did not know if she was even working today. She picked up on the 1st ring. I tried to sound calm. I'm in my backyard, I told her. I think I fell. I can't get up on my own. My voice shook more than I intended. She asked which house, even though she already knew, and I heard the sound of a car door before she'd even hung up. She was there in under 10 minutes, her mailbag still slung over her shoulder. She found me through the side gate I always left unlatched. She didn't make a fuss, didn't ask unnecessary questions. She knelt beside me in the grass, put one firm hand on my back, and said, I've got you. Let's get you somewhere safe first, then we figure out the rest. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to stay. Instead, I started crying, quietly. The way you cry when you've been holding something for a long time, and one small kindness undoes the whole lock. She called 911 herself. The ambulance came in 8 minutes. I remember the way the sunlight hit the hydrangeas along the fence as they lifted me onto the stretcher, bright and indifferent, and very beautiful. Patricia stood at the gate and watched until the doors closed. She waved once. I lifted 2 fingers in return. At the hospital, they told me I'd had a mild stroke. Not the kind that takes things from you permanently, but the kind that leaves a warning behind. A calling card pressed into the soft tissue of your brain that says, slow down, pay attention, nothing is guaranteed. I had weakness on my left side. My words came out slightly slower than I intended for the first day or 2, which frightened me more than the fall itself. I had always been precise with language. My husband used to say I could end an argument with a single sentence and still make the other person feel heard. I needed that precision back. The neurologist was direct and kind. He told me what to expect, what to watch for, what to avoid. He handed me printed sheets and spoke slowly without being condescending. He asked if I had family nearby. I said yes. He asked if I needed him to contact anyone. I said no, I'll take care of it. That was, I would learn, an optimistic answer. My daughter arrived the following afternoon, not the morning after, the following afternoon. She came alone, without flowers, without the children she was always using as a reason she couldn't visit. She walked in with a travel mug of coffee she hadn't finished, and her phone face up in her hand, which she kept glancing at while the nurse was still in the room explaining my discharge plan. How are you feeling? She asked, not quite looking at me. Better? I said, a little slower than usual. She nodded, already scanning the room the way people do when they're cataloging rather than visiting. She asked about the house twice within the first 20 minutes. Once, under the guise of concern you can't be alone out there, Mom, and once more, directly. She mentioned that my brother-in-law knew a real estate agent who was doing very well in the current market. She said it was probably worth getting an appraisal just to know the number, just to have options. She said my late husband would have wanted me to be comfortable. My husband would have wanted her to ask if I needed a glass of water. I didn't say that. I looked at the window instead, at the parking lot beyond, the flat gray sky, the row of cars sitting in afternoon stillness. A sparrow landed on the windowsill ledge outside, looked at nothing in particular, and flew away. When she left, she hugged me carefully, the way you hug someone when you're afraid of catching something. She said she'd be back soon. I didn't ask when. My son came 2 days later. He brought his wife, which I had not expected, and she brought a small box of chocolates from a brand I didn't recognize, which she set on the tray table without comment. My son sat in the chair farthest from the bed. He talked about traffic. He talked about a conference he had coming up in Denver. He asked once, almost as an aside, whether I'd thought about what I wanted to do with the print shop. That was what my husband had left behind, not a fortune, not an empire, just a small printing and framing shop on Clover Street that he had built over 32 years from a single second-hand press. He loved that shop. He knew every customer by name. He would go in on Saturday mornings just to stand behind the counter and smell the ink. When he died, he left it to me with a note paperclipped to the deed that said, "Do with this whatever makes you happiest, Ruth, not what's easiest." Happiest. I had been running it quietly, going in 3 mornings a week, mostly to check on the manager he'd trained, a young man named Daniel who had worked there since college. The shop was not making anyone rich, but it was steady. It was something. My son had never once stepped inside it. "What I want," I said carefully, "is to go home and recover." "Of course," he said quickly. "Of course, that's the priority." But the way he and his wife exchanged a glance when they thought I was looking at the ceiling told me everything I needed to know about why they had really come. Patricia visited that Thursday. She brought a bag of good coffee from the place on Elm Street that I liked, and a small succulent in a yellow pot because she said she thought I could use something living in the room that wasn't a machine. She sat beside the bed and we talked for an hour about nothing important, her granddaughter's school play, the new family that had moved in on my block, whether hydrangeas were worth the trouble. She never once mentioned the house or the shop or my finances or what I planned to do with the rest of my life. When she stood to go, she squeezed my hand and said, "I'll check on the roses while you're out. I've still got the gate code from the package incident." I laughed for the first time since I'd fallen. The recovery wing was quieter than the main floor. I had a window that faced a courtyard with a small fountain that ran during visiting hours. At night I lay listening to the soft mechanical breathing of the building and thought about my husband. Not in a grief-soaked way, more the way you might think about someone at a table that used to be full and now has one empty chair. Not all loss is loud. Some of it just sits with you like company you didn't ask for and can't quite ask to leave. On the 4th night, I reached for my reading glasses and my phone, and I started reading. I had noticed, when my daughter came to visit, that she had set her phone face down on the tray table while she used the restroom. She had not thought to log out of her messages. I had not planned to look, but the screen had lit up with a notification, and the name on the notification was my son's. And the first visible line of the message was, "Did she say anything about the Clover Street property yet?" I hadn't looked further that day. I'd put her phone face down again and pretended I had been resting, but I thought about it all night. And the following day, and the day after that. On the 4th night, I opened my own phone and looked at the messages my son had sent me over the past 6 months. Not many, mostly birthday texts and the occasional forwarded news article. Then I scrolled to my daughter's name, then my younger son's, who had not visited at all and had sent exactly one message 3 days after my stroke that said, "Heard you had a health thing. Let me know if you need anything." A health thing, 31 hours in a hospital, and I was a health thing. I set the phone down on the blanket and looked at the fountain in the courtyard, lit from below in the dark, water moving in small white circles. I had given 38 years to raising those 3. I had driven to midnight rehearsals and sat through every single school play, no matter how long. I had lent money I didn't have for deposits on apartments they couldn't afford. I had watched my husband spend his last summer teaching my son the basics of running the shop, patient and unhurried, and my son had sat through every lesson with barely concealed disinterest and never gone back after the funeral. I thought about the morning I spent on the grass, calling each of them in turn. Then I pressed the call button for the night nurse. She was a young woman named Simone, quiet and efficient, who never made me feel like an inconvenience. I asked her if she could hand me my bag from the closet. She did, without comment, and propped my pillows higher so I could sit. Inside my bag, beneath my glasses case and a worn paperback I'd been carrying for 3 weeks without opening, was a small accordion folder I had packed myself before the ambulance came. My husband had taught me that too. Always know where your papers are. The folder held a copy of my will, the deed to the house, the trust document we had drawn up together the year after he retired, and the operating agreement for the print shop. I laid them out on the blanket the way you arrange cards you've been dealt, and finally decided to look at properly. The will was last updated 5 years ago, when my husband was still alive and our 3 children were, at least in theory, still reliably present in our lives. Everything divided equally. The shop left to all 3 jointly, which in practice meant no one could sell it without the others agreeing, which in practice meant it would be paralyzed until someone lawyered up. The house to be divided upon my passing, the accounts as well. I read every page slowly. My left hand was still weaker than I wanted, but my mind was clear and quiet and decided in a way I hadn't expected to feel so soon. I found the amendment form at the back of the folder, blank and waiting. I had put it there years ago with every intention of updating the documents after my husband passed. And then life moved, and grief moved, and I kept not doing it. I uncapped a pen and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Not the legal weight, the human weight. Then I thought about the line of my daughter's text. Did she say anything about the property yet? And I thought about my son sitting in the chair farthest from the bed, talking about Denver, and I thought about the words health thing, and I thought about the soil cold against my cheek, and the cloud passing overhead and no one coming, and I began to write. I didn't sleep much that night, but the sleeplessness felt different. Not anxious, more like sitting beside a fire you've finally built properly and not wanting to leave it. In the morning, I called my attorney, a woman named Frances, who had handled everything after my husband passed, and who knew both the shop and the house as well as I did. She answered before her office opened, which I had not expected. I told her I needed to revise the trust and the will. I told her I needed it done before I was discharged. She said she'd come herself and bring her notary. She arrived at 10:15 with a leather portfolio and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the particular kind of focused calm that good attorneys bring into a room. We worked through every document methodically. I changed the executor. I restructured the trust. I made the shop a separate, protected entity. I made decisions I should have made 2 years ago, sitting in this hospital bed with my amended papers spread across a blanket, my left hand steadier than the night before. It took 90 minutes. Frances witnessed everything herself. When we finished, she gathered the papers into the portfolio and held my gaze. "You're sure?" she asked. "I've never been more sure of anything since the day I signed the original," I said. She nodded once, the way people do when they respect a decision, even if they didn't see it coming. When she left, the room felt lighter. Not empty, lighter. Like something heavy had been set down in the right place. Patricia drove me home 10 days after I was admitted. She adjusted the passenger seat without being asked, steadied my arm on the front steps, and waited while I found the right key. The porch had a broken spindle I'd been meaning to replace for months. The mail had piled up against the door, soft-edged from humidity. Inside, the air smelled stale, and the plants on the kitchen windowsill had given up entirely while I was gone. Patricia opened 2 windows and filled the kettle without asking. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the room, my husband's mug still on the hook where he'd left it. The calendar on the wall still showing the month he died, because I hadn't been able to turn it. The slow drip of the faucet I had asked my son to fix twice and he had not. The room held all of it, the before and the after, the things kept and the things lost. It felt like mine, more deeply mine than it had in a while. I told Patricia where the tea was. She made 2 cups without fussing and sat across from me. We talked for an hour. She told me about her younger daughter who had just started nursing school and was terrified of needles, which Patricia found both worrying and very funny. I told her about the print shop, about the way my husband used to stay late on the last Friday of every month to personally frame the orders from the children's hospital, always at no charge, because he said some things weren't about the ledger. Patricia listened with the particular attention of someone who is actually interested rather than waiting for their turn to speak. When she left that afternoon, she pressed a piece of paper into my hand with her number written on it, the personal one, not the work line. "Call me," she said, "for anything. Groceries, company, another fall. Call me first." I tucked it into my cardigan pocket. The week I came home was quiet. My daughter called once to ask how the recovery was going, and the call lasted under 4 minutes because she said she was on her way somewhere. My son sent a text asking if I had given any more thought to the Clover Street situation. I did not respond. My younger son did not reach out at all. I went in to see the shop on Wednesday morning, moving more slowly than usual, my cane tapping a deliberate rhythm on the sidewalk. Daniel was behind the counter when I arrived, talking with an older man about a large format print for a retirement party. He looked up when I walked in, and something shifted in his expression. Relief, I think, or something close to it. When the customer left, Daniel poured me a coffee from the small pot he kept behind the counter and said, "We missed you in here." I looked around the shop. The press my husband had bought secondhand in 1989 was still in the back corner, more decorative than functional now, but never moved because neither of us could imagine the room without it. The samples on the wall were arranged the way my husband had arranged them, and Daniel had kept them exactly so. I told Daniel I'd made some changes to the business documents. I told him the shop was in a protected trust now, and that I'd added provisions to keep it running as a going concern regardless of what happened to me. I told him I had named him co-trustee of the operating entity, which meant that if anything happened to me, he would have the authority to continue without interference. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "Are you sure?" I said, "My husband spent every Friday night of his retirement framing pictures for sick children for free. He chose you to run this place. I trust his judgment more than my own in most things, and I trust mine in this. Yes, I'm sure." Daniel looked down at the counter. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. He said he would not let us down. I told him I already knew that. I walked home slowly, taking the long way past the park. A boy was trying to fly a kite with no wind, running back and forth in determined circles. I watched him for a little while. Then I kept walking. The visit came on a Saturday afternoon, which I had expected. What I hadn't expected was all three of them. My daughter's car pulled up first. My son arrived 5 minutes later. My younger son, who had not been to the house in over a year, came last, hands in his pockets, squinting at the porch like he was trying to remember something. I had made tea. I had set out cups. I had done this deliberately because I wanted them to understand I had not been ambushed by their arrival. I had prepared for it. They came in and arranged themselves in the living room, my daughter in the armchair, my 2 sons on the couch, all of them carrying the stiff discomfort of people who have rehearsed something and are now less certain than they were in the car. "We've been talking," my daughter began, "about what's best going forward." I let her talk. She said the word safety 4 times. She said the word practical 3 times. She said independent living twice, with a pause before each time as though she were stepping carefully around a sleeping animal. My son nodded along, interjecting occasionally with the word options. My younger son said almost nothing, just looked at the floor, then the window, then the floor again. I let her finish. Then I reached for the 3 envelopes on the side table. Each had a name written on it in my careful script. I handed them out one at a time. "What's this?" my son asked. "Something I wrote while I was in the hospital," I said, "while I was waiting for someone to answer the phone." The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Not comfortable, not hostile. Something in between, like a room after a window has been opened and the air hasn't settled yet. My daughter opened hers first. I watched her eyes move across the page. I had written her letter in 3 short paragraphs. The first reminded her of the October she was 13, and her best friend was in an accident, and how I had driven 2 hours in a rainstorm to bring that girl's mother a meal because I knew she hadn't eaten and couldn't. Leave the hospital. The second reminded her of the daughter I had watched her be growing up, the one who noticed when someone was left out and did something about it, who once gave away a coat she loved to a girl in her class who didn't have one. The third paragraph was only 2 sentences. I wrote them for you. I had written, so you would remember who you used to be before you started seeing me as a problem to be solved. Her jaw tightened. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her lap. My son read his more slowly. I had written about the time he was 7 and had a nightmare every night for 3 weeks and would come to our room at 2 in the morning and I would get up every single time, not once making him feel like a burden. I had written about his first job interview, how I had ironed his shirt myself even though he was 24 and fully capable, because I wanted him to walk in knowing someone cared about the details. I wrote about the morning I lay in the backyard calling him while the sprinkler dripped and the sky moved overhead and his phone rang and rang. I ended with one line. The shop was built on 32 years of showing up. You would have known that if you'd ever come in. He set the letter face down on the couch cushion. He didn't speak. My younger son read his the fastest. His was the shortest, just one side of a page, because I had less to say, and I had decided not to fill silence with words just for the sake of length. I reminded him that he had called me a health thing. I told him I hoped that in 20 years, when he was sitting somewhere needing someone, the person he called would use better words than that. No one said anything for a long moment. Then my son cleared his throat and said, with an edge beneath the even tone, "The shop. Have you made decisions about the shop?" "Yes," I said. "And the house?" "Yes." "Without talking to us?" I looked at him steadily. "I talked to you in the hospital. You told me about Denver." His wife, who had been sitting quietly beside him, looked at the floor. I continued. "I talked to your sister in that same hospital room. She talked to me about real estate. I called all 3 of you from the grass in my backyard. No one came. So yes, I made my decisions. They've been made and documented, and they are final." The room held that information for a moment. "You can't just," my daughter started. "I can," I said. And I did. "That's what the letters are. Not to punish you, to let you know that I understand what happened, and I've made my peace with it, and I would like you to make yours." My younger son stood up first. He didn't say anything. He walked to the door, and I heard the latch behind him. My son and daughter sat for another few minutes, my daughter with her hands folded over the envelope in her lap, my son looking at the middle distance above the fireplace. Eventually, my daughter said quietly, "Is there anything we can do to—" "No," I said. "Not now. Maybe with time. But not now." She nodded once. She took the envelope with her. My son left his on the couch cushion. I sat for a long time after they left. The afternoon light moved across the floor in slow bars. The house was quiet, but not empty, the way it had been quiet since my husband died, holding its shape around me. I thought about him, about the morning he signed the deed to the shop, his hand steady and sure, about the way he used to say that the people who showed up were the people who counted, and that life was long enough to figure out the difference. I thought he would have understood what I'd done, even if it surprised him. I thought he might have done it sooner. I got up slowly, my cane finding its familiar rhythm on the floor, and I went to the kitchen to make another cup of tea. The weeks after were still. No knocks, no calls that needed answering, no messages that required anything from me. The absence of obligation felt strange at first, like a sound you've been hearing so long you don't notice it until it stops. Then it began to feel like breathing room. Patricia came by on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She never lingered past an hour unless I asked, and she always seemed to know which mornings I wanted company and which ones I needed quiet. She fixed the broken spindle on the porch without being asked, claiming she had leftover wood from a project and nowhere to put it. I thanked her. She waved it off. She had, I should say, tried to refuse when I told her about the will. I had called her 2 weeks after coming home and said simply, "I've left the house in trust, and you're the primary beneficiary, along with Daniel from the shop." She had been silent for a long moment and then said she didn't need anything from me. She hadn't done what she did for anything in return. I told her I knew that. I told her that was precisely why. She didn't argue further. but I could hear in her voice a kind of stunned gratitude that had nothing to do with money. The look, if a voice can have a look, of someone who has been seen and hasn't quite adjusted to it yet. I went to the shop twice a week. Daniel had started a small display in the front window of the shop, rotating prints from local photographers, changed monthly. It had brought in new customers, younger ones who stayed to look around and sometimes came back. My husband would have loved it. I told Daniel so. He smiled the quiet smile of someone who had been hoping to hear exactly that. One morning in early October, I found the old press in the back of the shop, with a fresh piece of paper loaded in it, the way my husband used to leave it at the end of the day, ready for whatever came next. Daniel had done it. He hadn't mentioned it. I stood there for a while and looked at it, and the grief that moved through me was the gentle kind, the kind that comes with love still attached. I went home that afternoon and opened the drawer in the hallway table where I kept my important things. Inside was the folder with all the updated documents, the trust and the will and the operating agreement, everything finalized and witnessed and signed. I had read them twice after Francis delivered the copies, making sure they said exactly what I meant. They did. Beside the folder was a small envelope, unsealed. Inside was a single handwritten page, a letter I had started in the hospital and finished at my kitchen table on a night when the radio was playing softly and the tea was the right temperature for once. I hadn't addressed it to any of my children. I hadn't addressed it to Patricia or Daniel or Francis or anyone who would read it after I was gone. I had written it to myself. I had written, "You spent 40 years making sure everyone around you had what they needed. You made yourself small in rooms where you should have taken up space. You answered every call at 2 in the morning, and you drove in the rain, and you gave away things you didn't have, because love, you believed, was meant to be given freely. You were right about love. You were wrong about the freely part. Free doesn't mean without limits. Free means without conditions. Those are different things. It took a fall in the grass and a telephone that rang to empty air to teach you the difference. You are not starting over. You are starting from what remains, which is more than enough." I read it again that afternoon, sitting in my chair by the window with the October light coming in long and amber across the floor. Outside, the roses had gone dormant for the season, trimmed back to their stiff brown canes. The sprinkler had been fixed. The broken spindle was replaced. The porch light was new. The house looked, from the outside, exactly as it always had. From the inside, it felt like something that finally belonged to itself. I folded the letter back into the envelope and set it under the folder, beside the deed with my name and my husband's typed cleanly across the top. I closed the drawer. I went to the kitchen and found the good mug, the one with the small chip in the handle that I'd never replaced because my husband had given it to me, and I preferred it broken to gone. I made tea. I sat at the table. Through the window, the backyard was bare and quiet, the rose canes casting thin shadows across the grass. And I was here, still here. And that, for now, was everything.